how's it going, everyone? So I am addressing some questions slash thoughts from Christopher Wells. We were talking a bit about intellectual property, whether or not it should exist as something that is protected via government, via force. And the voluntarist libertarian position is that piracy, that is the copying of ideas, as long as you're not depriving the owner of the original object, for example, someone comes with a cup, someone mimics it, or someone else came up with the cup at the same time, but the other person, got to the patent office first, that's not a ethical harm. And the reason is because the libertarian voluntarist principles focus on depriving the owner of the original physical object. The biggest complaint that people have about this is they say, what about incentives? Okay, if somebody takes all this time, puts billions of dollars into research and development into an idea, well, how the heck is something going to get developed? Because people don't want to take the risk. They can't reap the profits from their hard work if someone else can just copy it. And the response to this is first and foremost that doesn't matter from the ethical standpoint. From the philosophical ethical standpoint, it doesn't matter. It's like it's no different than saying we reject the notion of slavery because as a norm, the ownership of humans is wrong, and we can go into reasons why. But the point is that that's just the analogy here, is that it's seen as ethically wrong to use force, which is what happens, with the patent office, violence against other people, for not depriving the original owner of physical manifest object, but just maybe mimicking or coming within the gamut of an idea, and reproducing it, whether it was, back solved and then recreated, or they just came with it on their own, but someone else at the patent office first. From how it's dealt with incentive-wise, that comes into play in several ways. It's first, to me, very clear that people have a general incentive to progress and to have efficiency. So I think that this is amply seen in, for example, YouTube. Tons of people, for intellectual purposes, invent and improve on many different types of technologies. And I see this a lot in computer programming. There's lots of people who do open source. There's lots of people who do collaborative. There's lots of people who do it for the academic side. There's not for profits. But that's just barely touching the surface. I was actually talking about this with a lawyer friend of mine who has a mechanical engineering degree and, does a lot of patent-oriented work. And he was saying, well, what about the company that does one small little change in a pre-existing machine? They put a lot of money into the change, makes a lot of money, but anybody else can easily copy it on the fly. And then when he said that, he also said something that kind of stuck his foot in his mouth, and he said that in current patent law environment, there are companies that exist that literally look at every patent that's made public and they immediately go to find a way to do the same thing in a different way that just comes outside the gamut of what the patent covers, and allows people to enjoy the product fairly soon, in another way. Whether it's reinventing a drug, reinventing a type of mechanical process, there are companies that exist just to do that, and it's done on the reg pretty quickly. And so the point is that when we're comparing one system to another, the question should always be what is versus what could be. You know what I mean? That's a big part of libertarianism, voluntarism, is it's about the ethical foundations, and once those are secure, well, then you have to it's just what will be, and then compare it to how it is. When you look at it from that perspective, you already have the fact that even with people putting their patents out, there's other people that are immediately out there coming out with other alternatives. So it's like, this whole protection thing is not as great. Where does it come into stronger play? Stuff where it's copyright, like Disney, and where they would have had their original works out in the public domain already. They lobbied and got extensions and all this other crazy stuff. When it comes to maybe artwork, that's more of a potential pitfall for keeping something out for the public. But even now, it's like people get around it fairly soon. But there's actually a bigger danger with the patent system that the government uses, and that is 35 U.S.C. 181. and I'm just double checking 35U.S.C.181. That is a federal statute that allows the government, yes, to take inventions and keep them from the public. I actually have a friend who works in the patent office, and he says, yeah, they have to screen for this kind of thing. But if there is an invention, and this is really the big kicker, there is an invention that is considered a threat to national security, goes off the books. The person who invented it gets no money. There's been cases, I have a couple of them, one guy was like, hey, I want $10 million, this is a big idea. Government's like, bye-bye, it's ours now. The government sends us for over, 5,000 things. You can read, Wired magazine articles on it and things like that. The government has the patent office really there not to protect people technically. It's really, or at least from what they're actually doing versus what they pretend they're doing. The government has the patent office to screen for high-tech inventions, and if they think that it's going to be amazing, they take it from the public. They keep the public from advancing too fast. And that is actually the even bigger issue with the system as it is that the government uses the patent office to screen technology, keep people in the dark ages compared to where they would be if those some 5,000 inventions and improvements had been released. And it's like a way to attract moths to a light. The government wants inventors to be like, oh yes, come bring us your inventions, so the government can make sure that it's safe for the public, and then they take it. And then the government becomes more and more powerful and gets bigger control, and a bigger tyranny then ensues. Now that is technically a tangent from the general concept. One could argue, okay, government does not have that power. We still need patent protection. But again, this is something that is not, A, in the current system, necessarily a perfect protection, and B, doesn't necessarily have a better or still a more technologically progressive outcome when you remove those protections. And now, looking at from a utilitarian perspective, bringing in those types of arguments, I would say you have people that want to do technological advancements for in-house in their company. Some people be like, oh, well, why do people invest? Well, if you have a big company, there's a lot of business, they have an incentive to increase efficiencies for themselves. Even if maybe somebody else, found it or it got leaked, they might say, well, if we do this process, it's going to save us a lot of money, and that allows us to do other things. That's a great incentive internally for a business to innovate. And to have research and development. There's the academic exercise. There's going to be forever people that are trying to learn and educate and grow and have shared common interests and want to do research because they enjoy it, because they want to grow their intellect. There's going to be people that possibly do not-for-profit groups that come up with inventions or ways to help people. And chances are there might even be organizations developed that have mutual interest funding. Maybe multiple companies fund this one group for certain types of innovations, and they all get access to it, but it all will always improve their efficiency. And that's what some people who don't calculate every economic aspect to this are missing, is they think, oh, it's just the profit motive aspect. Like, how can we leverage this for sales? And it's like, no, you can make a net increase in your income by having efficiency internally. And actually, that's been the biggest propeller of the American economy, despite all the horrible regulations that are out there. I mean, the American government is currently at its worst for the amount of legislation, restrictions, and taxes and everything that's coming on the American people as a whole. And we would be definitely in the dark ages if it was not for the fact that the computer technology realm has been exponentially increasing on its own independently, and of course sometimes in the black market outside of government, and that has such an exponentially high efficiency factor that it offsets many of the traditional losses that would have been experienced. And this could be as simple as someone's a database administration person. They come with formulas that do a task that took two people 2 weeks before, now in 2 minutes. You know what I mean? That's a savings to the company. That's real savings because they had money diverted into one thing. Now they don't. Well, that's now an internal net profit. They didn't have to sell anybody anything to increase their internal liquid capital. And people don't recognize that there is an internal incentive. And the bigger the company, the more likely they have opportunity to think about ways to increase internal efficiency, to do more, to have more liquid. And I really don't see how that would completely stunt technological growth. Be like, oh crap, you know what? Everybody in the world is like, I'm not going to be able to hold people from using this for 7 years. So therefore, I'm not going to do any engineering stuff. It's just not. It's just not true. People do it because they love it, and people do it because they can either enjoy it personally, or they want to help somebody else, or they might even just want to leverage it for a short term. You know what I mean? Not everybody is necessarily like, I have to be a billionaire or bust on this invention, and that means I need to have this patent. And what happens potentially in this situation is that it becomes about the things that can't be replicated. You can replicate a Keurig, or, coffee machine. Can you replicate service? You can't. You can't necessarily represent the human element. So a company that um, is talented at recruiting the human element in terms of customer service, in terms of warranties offered, in terms of all this other stuff, that becomes where the leveraging leveraging starts to happen. And my friend disagrees with me on this, who we talked about at length, who does the patent type of stuff. He's like, oh yeah, but it's so easy for people to match that on terms like the warranty length and the type of service. And I disagree. From someone that studies this quite extensively, there is a difference among companies in terms of how they curate their management and their frontline people, and their service aspect, and their one up value. And even if it was possible that because of this change in the system, technological growth went a little slower, is that a bad thing in the sense that maybe the old ways of doing things get improved slowly on their own? It's one of those things where we think in America, if you've been around for a while, the most the most prevalent one is when you think about uh, products that were made pre-1970s, when a lot of stuff was made in the U.S. It was made with much higher quality materials, and then as stuff got imported and the prices were going down, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that, and people being open up to access to all sorts of technology because now it's cheaper but it doesn't last as long. Well, is that necessarily better for the long term in terms of overall leveraging? Inexpensive technology helps those who don't have as much start to advance and improve their lives, improve the efficiencies. But for the people who have the money, maybe they'd rather have the Vitamix or something like that, like the 70s or 60s style blender that you're like, wow, this could actually last for 30 freaking years because the magnet motor there is so freaking strong. And that's not wrong. Like, it's like, wow, this is a great blender. It's always going to blend. It does exactly what I want, and it's going to do it for 30 years. And that's how it went for a long time. Even in the early 1900s, they had light bulbs that were lasting for 50, 60, 70, 100 years potentially, before the equipment became cheapened so that people would have to buy more. The filaments became more brittle and less able to last. And that's just really a question of how the technology is implemented. You can say, well, anybody can do this, blah, blah, blah. But it's not really the case. Not everybody can leverage even universally open concepts well. It does take a certain level of talent to get the right raw materials, to leverage it in distribution, and to bring it to people. It's not always that simple, and there is still a competitive element to it. There is. And that just is what changes. You have a lot more competition in a race to the top for who provides the best customer value for what people want. Who provides the greatest satisfaction for return customers and stuff like that. And that's okay. You know what I mean? Tons of products are still sold, even if Advil, or you could say the Tylenol, whatever, those types of aspirins. The base formula went into the public domain. The trademark went into the public domain. With the original aspirin. Do people still buy it? Yes. Could people still leverage that? Yeah. Duh. I mean, it's it's something that we see even in things that have gone into the public domain, that they still get leverage, that people still buy or sell it if there is a demand. That's the other issue. It's like you could put all this R&D research and patent the hell out of something, and then someone comes up with something better. Oh, well, your patent ain't gonna help you then because nobody wants it. So it's one of those things where there's so many variables in it to begin with that, again, what is now versus what could be, and the ethics of how people are treated, the ethics of not using violence, because that's what happens with the patent office. The ethics of not using violence against somebody because they say, okay, I took this microwave and I deconstructed it and we rebuilt it and we're going to try to make our own, or two people, one person in the same jurisdiction, that is United States, because obviously hard to enforce certain types of patent law against other sovereign nations who are not under jurisdiction. But let's just say, so in California, someone in Florida, big difference, distance, come up with the same idea, same time, person in California wins in terms of getting it filed first. Even though that other person had all the plans, they had it all down, they're like, oh yeah, we can totally patent this, the other person beats them. Why is it that the other person who came up with the same idea now should be threatened with violence for implementing their own idea? It's a level of insanity in terms of ethical human treatment, how people treat each other with violence, that will continue to put people into the dark ages and continue to be, in a some total sense, destructive. The idea is that humans need to be, and I'm saying need to as in terms of my own subjective goal. Yes, I'm going to admit that all on the table when I'm talking about voluntarism. Yes, of course. Um, but humans, if they're going to become more peaceable, more intelligent, and grow their technology as a whole, which and on my based on my research, people do agree to a high confidence level, that they don't want to be murdered, raped, stolen from, that to decrease those violent aspects, those elements which threaten people with violence for victimless activity in terms of actual physical harm to somebody else, or theft against personal property, the taking the original item, have to be done away with. So this was very likely to address just one of these issues. I'll do another video to address another one, but I hope that helps with your thought process on intellectual property and why piracy is not theft if you look at it from a liberty perspective. Take care, everyone.